Good morning, everybody. I'm quite conscious, because I was told last night over dinner, that I'm between you and lunch. So what we hope is that this will be a Q&A. We do want it to be interactive. We do want questions from you guys as we go through. And so some of this I'll be sort of triggering thoughts and triggering what you guys are doing. But equally, there are some things I want to present and things that I want to go through. So the explanation behind today, what we're going to talk through is, as John Brzezinski mentioned earlier, it's our 15th anniversary, and we've been running projects from supplier management to onboarding suppliers since the earliest day, because for every customer you've got a supplier and vice versa. But really what I'm wanting to touch on is some of the projects and the programs we've been running over the last sort of 5 or 6 years since the merger between Rubber Network and Electrica. One of the things that happened, and thank you very much for Onno being in the room from Goodyear, is that when Rubber Network merged into the Electrica network, they brought with them a huge amount of skill and knowledge around how to do supply management rollouts, how to go to the supply base. Electrica, the chemical hub, was very traditionally to the customers and the supply chain to the customers. So I'm going to be touching on, and I'm not going to go into great detail, you'll sort of get a slide of each in some ways, on 4 of the projects which have been running, and really highlighting on some of the presentations that they've given at conferences like this over the years. And just sort of picking out a few of the bits and pieces. What I want to do is really sort of show how there's been a progression, how things have changed, and how even though a lot of the KPIs and the desire to do it has been the same for a long time, the requests on us as Electrica have increased and changed, and how we're responding to that. You'll hear from myself, we'll be sort of running through the slides, so I'm Simon Hardy, for those who don't know me. I'm from our Business Process Solutions team, and it's actually a relatively new team within Electrica, and was driven by the projects you guys are doing. And we got to a stage where we need more of a holistic view of what's happening on the projects. So they've created a team who are looking at the connectivity and the supplier base and the stakeholders and the support and all of the elements to make sure it all wraps together so that you're getting the most benefit from any of the projects. My colleague Dick Veer is here. Again, a lot of you probably know Dick Veer. To be honest, I'm the one that tends to talk about it, whereas Dick is the one that actually does stuff. So when it comes to questions, I'll answer any of the easy ones, and anything that's complicated, I'll pass on to Dick Veer. That's pretty much the way that we work.
Actually, 3 out of the 4 stories which will be presented, I have been involved more or less. I think one can assume that for Goodyear I was heavily involved. Yeah.
To go a long way back in history, from my perspective at least, before I joined Electrica, I worked for Air Products. Air Products was one of the shareholders for the original chemical, and I presented this at a roadshow conference, sort of a smaller version of this, in Manchester 11 years ago, which apart from the fact that it may make me feel very old. But what I'd done in Air Products was looking through the sort of the 3 steps in the process, sort of order, goods received, and then invoice, and actually looked at the different bits of it and said, if I make that automated, if I do that in an electronic way, where am I finding the savings? And one of the important things that came out was you can get incremental bits in each of the steps, but to get the most value, you need to do all of it. So it really needs that I need to be doing requisition to pay to get the complete value. If you just do bits and pieces, the danger is you can still spread bad information through the process. And what ended up happening is I talked to the companies that were doing projects, and as I looked into things, I was still kind of hearing people who would just come from one side because finance was saying I need to do e-invoicing, or procurement wants to do something with their suppliers, or things like that. And again, trying to think you need the whole thing really to make sure that you're getting most value for both the suppliers and for the customers. One of the things is that and I sort of know the reason for this, is I have not seen anyone else do this level of analysis and come in with I mean, we always used to say at Air Products that if we had a full auditor invoice, we save $25. So actually, if you sort of work the numbers back up there, and this was on exchange rate in 2004, you sort of get this $25 for each electronic invoice if I've done the full process. But I rarely, if ever, come across companies who are doing that sort of calculation, trying to work from a procurement side, where is there value to be saved and what amounts are there. So this slide still tends to come out in a lot of the decks that I present to people around why would you do supplier management. But again, I think it's the thing for yourself, if you haven't done that, you haven't looked through the process and said, actually in the different steps, when I go through it, where can I save elements? Then it's something I would recommend you go and do, because as I say, you find it in each bit, but then when you look at everything, you suddenly think, because I did this up here, I'm saving a lot down the bottom here. I presented in 2010, again around supply management, what I was seeing from the marketplace and a sort of a progression running through. And what I'd seen very much is that in the early days it was very much for the large partners. I'm doing that point-to-point EDI, the sort of big raw materials guys. They started being converted over to Elementor, so it was a lot cheaper if you were dealing with your 10 big chemical suppliers who were on the Elementor network. And that's what Air Products did. Air Products did, I think, 8 connections to Dow, BASF, somebody, Shell, etc., etc. These guys are kind of the early Elementor partners. But we had one connection to Elementor, which then got to something like 40 or 50% of our spend because they were such big partners. Equally, what people were doing were the MRO and catalogs. So they were doing Ariba, they were doing Hubwoo, they were doing Trade Ranch, they were doing all these kind of elements around trying to manage the very, very high volume, very low spend initiatives. And we've been seeing that going on, but what we've been seeing is consolidation in the marketplace. We've been seeing consolidation from people like SAP buying Quadrant, buying Ariba, things like that, really kind of pulling into the network from their perspective. On the other side, we've been seeing people doing what you're doing around raw material, we're seeing the value of the order and the ship notice and the invoice. Well, actually, I'll apply that to true MRO. So I'll apply it to buying pumps and valves and pipes and things like that. And then you get there and say, well, actually, the large partners who are doing consumables, I'll start pulling those in as well. Particularly because of the increased capability of ERP systems to do SRM to manage catalogs. So I was projecting when I was in 2010 forward 2 or 3 years to sort of see what the project would be in 2012. In some ways I was correct, but what you'll see as we'll go through, I was also very, very wrong in other places. So some of the projects we've been seeing are really this sort of drive to very, very large volume of partners, an awful lot really kind of getting into click and connect type of projects with raw material space. From your perspectives, I mean, I know people like Ono are from the sort of procurement space. Who's from sort of supply management, supply chain base, and who's from other bits and pieces? Hands up. So is most people really from the technology side of the house? Technology. Okay. That's on customer management, I know, yeah. Okay. So I'd be intrigued to know if what people are seeing is this split still between the sort of the MRO and the catalog stuff from the raw material side of things. We still see it, but I think we see it because our expertise is in raw materials. But I'd be, as I kind of go around and talk to people, the understanding of what's happening there would be quite useful. So, what I wanted to do was really to look into the goals and the KPIs that companies had when they were doing the project. And I've picked deliberately 3 or 4 different projects which were being driven from subtly different directions. But when you look at it, that the reasons behind that became very, very similar. So the first one, and I want to thank Ono, because Ono presented this in 2010. And Dick was doing the project for Ono where he was really pushing out to your top 100 suppliers, vendor managed and owned inventory, saying the value to Goodyear of supplying to them good quality forecasts so the suppliers could then manage that inventory and have the commercial conversation around, because I'm letting you manage that, I want you to own that inventory as well. What does come up into there again, and you'll see it all the way through, is that standardised process. Is that one way of doing things to all my suppliers, so that I can easily migrate them in and out of a process. And Dick, I don't know if you want to mention around when you're dealing with the suppliers, when you're talking about the VMOI process, how easy it was to sort of bring them into that.
Yeah, no, I think our experience is that for the process, basically we didn't have really issues to get them accepting VMOI. The biggest point or challenge was to get them accepting the consignment piece. So the commercial relation between Goodyear and the supplier to accept that consignment piece, to accept to the contract conditions, and then to be able to implement VMOI. That was the main reason why it took several years to really reach a certain amount of implementation. And the focus was really on the high volume suppliers, so about 20% of raw material suppliers.
And so that's very much when we sit and we do projects with any of you guys, it is who are the stakeholders, who are the ones that hold the levers with the suppliers, who are the ones that can go out to them and say, this is what we as Goodyear or Dow or BASF or Oxale want to do. Because the eProcurement people, the techie people going to do it won't have that strength. So you've got to make sure that you've got the stakeholders behind, that you've got the letter that comes from the CPO that says, this is what we're doing, this is the project, this is what we're trying to do it. From a very similar style, you'll sort of see the transactional efficiency benefits and things like this. AkzoNobel started in about 2011 trying to improve and centralise their e-procurement. And across the board, the sort of slides up through and down to this one was very much around all of the things that they were doing in procurement and trying to drive a centralisation. AkzoNobel, up until about 2004, was still really very much a sort of a disparate group of companies under the AkzoNobel name, which was really a trading company. So AkzoNobel sat down with the money coming through, and all the different groups were having their own way of doing things. And what happened from about 2004-05 onwards, they started having lots of initiatives which were one something. So one hub, one procurement, one customer, things like that. Really trying to force the whole of the organisation to say, we've got to stop trying to do these processes which are basically the same process, different everywhere. Let's centralise into one thing. So a lot of the drive here from an e-procurement was to say, well, if I'm going to make sure that you always have a PO number for every order, they could roll it into I've sorted this out so I know it goes into an automated process and so I can have a very standardised way of doing things. So again, it did come down to that sort of standardised processes, but rather than coming from a procurement, I want to drive the way that I spend, it came very much from we know that as a supply chain organisation, we are not as efficient as we should be. So kind of driving things like that. The third type of project that we see quite often is pure IT. So this was Rodeo, which is now Solvay, in North America, were trying to collapse some of their systems. They had old EDI boxes, they had old things they were doing. But because they'd done the project with raw materials 3 or 4 years beforehand, rather than I need to build this from scratch, we could then just kind of load on top of what Rodeo was doing. But again, when you look at it, they were saying, well, I've built this standard process, I've spent time doing my standard order, goods receipt, invoice process. It's very, very easy for me then to collapse that IT infrastructure and roll it into, And what this has kind of all probably come down to I guess the biggest case study that we've got at the moment is really the BASF project. In 2008, they presented this one, which was around e-invoicing. By 2014, they're starting to present about their VIP project, where they're going to 8,500 suppliers, raw material suppliers, with the aim of getting about 4,000 of them implemented and automated doing an O2O process. And very much the conversation with them has been around how you can do that in the most efficient way, because we can't do it one by one as we have historically. But also when you look at it, it's the same drivers as I was presenting in 2004, as Olmo was presenting in 2010. It is quality of the vendors, it's standardised processes, it's how can I improve collaboration and working with that supply base. So technology has come along to make things easier to do it, but the underlying drive of why you're trying to do it is still pretty much the same as I was seeing in the eProcurement presentations in 2000. And so I think what we want to make sure gets across to you guys is you've got the desire to do it, you know there's business cases, you know there's the value of doing it. I think we're now at the stage where Elenica, you can throw anything at us and we have the capability of being able to do those sorts of projects. So you sort of get to the stage of sort of 4 buckets of where the KPIs and the savings come from. So there is a commercial relationship with suppliers. Increasingly, people are wanting to improve that relationship, particularly in the raw material space, because it's so important for keeping the plant running that it's more of a collaborative mood than probably 2006-07. I think one of the things from a traditional chemicals raw material was the chaos in 2008, because prior to that I think a lot of procurement buying was I can get it in China and get it cheaper. A chemical is a chemical. It doesn't really matter if it's made in Belgium or if it's made in China. But then what people started realising was actually the solidity of the company, the supply chain of it, everything that goes around that meant that actually I'll look more favourably at Solvay in Belgium than I will at a company who might make hydrogen peroxide, which is the simplest product you can make, but it's in a different country and the supply chain is harder and things like that. So I think the collaborative nature of raw material buyers increased at about that point. Increasingly, we're getting more and more of that process standardisation. More companies have bought Roman paths or have been bought out or are changing things, and so are collapsing ERP systems into one place. When you do that, you want a standardised process. And the BASFs of the world are a machine. I mean, in the last 6 or 7 years, you've had Cognis, you've had Siba, you've had Engelhardt. All these companies get brought into BASF and they get brought into one standard process. Very much, I mean, it's what Solvay are going through at the moment, that with the Solvay-Rohde merger, it's the how can we look at that, how can we make sure that we've got all our information in a standardised way that can be well used. What goes with that is that removal of IT costs. I've got an IT overhead because I've still got Roman Heart or because I've got Siba or I've got Confidence or whatever. So we're constantly getting that, the driver for it is not only improving procurement, it is lowering the cost of ownership doing projects. So that comes in. And what we're being pushed at is they want it faster. Is, well, I've done a business case. I know I want to go out to 500 or 1,000 or 8,000 suppliers. I don't want to wait 5 years to do it. I want it as soon as possible. And so we're getting more and more people doing the give me wave-based projects which I can do across multiple regions in multiple ways so that I get the most bang for my buck very quickly. And you'll see in the Acton Nobel case at the moment how we're starting to structure where there'll be a central project manager but we'll have project teams in different regions and different things going on so that you're communicating back to the stakeholders in a centralised way, but we're running around in different regions trying to make sure that all of these are going together and working very well. And that's working both on the supplier side and on the customer side. So a good example is Dow, who do the quick link email for ordering with their customers. And I think they're up to something like 1,400, 1,500 because their customers using a very simple process, but we have the same process run in both Europe and the US, but we have different project teams in different areas, to kind of make sure that drives forward. What I'd be interested to know, and I don't know if you've got any thoughts, is what's missing? What are the sort of the KPIs and the reasons for doing projects are we not factoring in? We're hearing things about increased collaboration, we're hearing things about security of supply being an important factor of why someone buys raw material. Particularly global risk. I mean, I was at a conversation on Monday with a company, I'm working with DHL, who are providing risk tools where you can sort of see if something goes wrong in China recently, what routes go through there, what information, so that can be fed back to central teams who can then review it and say, okay, I need to change these lanes, I need to get product from different places, things like that. So risk management is coming increasingly into the reasons why people are doing projects. So, what is the latest status of these things? And I've got a slight caveat again. I want to present sort of on behalf of our clients, of people like Goodyear and Axel and things like this. So, some of these are slides from a few years ago, but they see the progression. So, and the first one is Onno's, where Onno was presenting this in 2013, so sort of 3 years after the programme had been running. And the reason I picked this slide is it reminds Alemka that the bit that they're doing with Alemka is only part of the overall. That we're often looking at the invoicing bit, or we're looking at the raw materials bit, or things like that. But when you are a CPO for Europe, when you're at that level, you try to look at all those initiatives, and you're trying to deal with multiple project teams who are doing multiple things. Some of them in-house completely, some of them with service providers like Alemka. So a lot of what we've got to do as a project team, a program team, is make sure that we're communicating to you in a way where it factors in with all the other things that are going on. And so often we'll go back to companies and sort of say, time out, what are you trying to do? What are you needing to communicate to your different stakeholders and the sponsors of the project and things like that? And I know, again, for Goodyear, you present back on a regular basis, is it monthly?
On a monthly basis to the Goodyear project team. And so we had a review that with the current program of implementing VMOI with consignment, we are at a certain level of, okay, we reached close to the maximum achievable, but we're still a decent amount of transactions and suppliers who are not willing or capable of doing consignment. Is there another way to automate at least the process? So maybe to implement the VMOI process without consignment fees, or to implement just a regular procure-to-pay automated process. Just to reach, as close as possible, the 100% of raw material supplier.
And Onno, a question for you, and sorry to put you on the spot, but the compliance levels, have they stayed at that 97, 100%? Because that's the thing for me, is we've got implementations which we put in, again, as our products in 2002-3. And they have been running solidly for 11, 12 years with compliance of those suppliers at the process. This is what you do, and you do it consistently every single day. So once it's implemented, it sticks and it stays there. And people almost do the, why was I doing it in paper and Excel spreadsheets and the chaos before, when it's so automated and so machine to machine and so designed to only deal with exceptions, not the day to day. Thank you all. I've put this one, this is sort of the only, if you like, the sort of the product slide, and it was how to communicate what we get from the people doing the projects. When you look at the order to invoice process, it sort of stops a step early often, because you'll sort of do the people who are like, I know my order, I've done my delivery, my goods receipt, and I want to do the invoice. But you then remember that your suppliers want to find out if the invoice is being paid, what's going on with it, things like that. The electronic transfer of money is done so efficiently through SWIFT and groups like this that Alemka doesn't have any value there. But still, if you're a supplier, you want to go and look, has a check being raised, am I going to get my money when I think it's going to be? So when BASF did the VIP project, they came to us and said, got to include payment device, you've got to bring in this part of the process, because this is what's going to help my suppliers. But equally, they've done the analysis saying the amount of phone calls that they get into account payable, doing the, have you paid things, where is it, what's happening, things like that. And even from big companies, was too much for them. So they're saying, well, as part of this, let's make sure that we can get these automation handed back to people, because nowadays we're all living in such an internet world that I'll quite happily look at something, see my status of stocks and shares, or see my status of an order from Amazon. And if you're in credit control in companies with a customer services organisation, you don't really want to have to phone up BASF to find out where you're, if you can go to an easy web page where it will show you where that payment details are. Now, could we send that as a message back into someone's system? Probably. But people don't need that. They don't need the information to flow back. So again, what we're seeing is people saying, let's stop that information at a point so it can be easily accessed, rather than always sending data back into ERP systems. And we had a conversation with people, and again, the conversation I had on Monday with the Continental folks was, where does this information need to be? Because it can be in Lenica, it can be in your SAP, it can be somewhere else. And so you're sort of having that conversation about where's the best place for it, where do the people who are worrying about risk management, what they want to do, how do they get to their desk, what happens. So the instant thought of, well, I can always get stuff back into SAP, that's still there and still is 95% of what we do. But increasingly people are saying, can I do it in a collaborative way somewhere else? And I think that the guy next door in the logistics space is talking about some of the collaborative things that we're doing around there. Looking at it from a different thing, so if BASF is asking us to extend the process, the Act and the Bell was much more around how can we follow what they're doing, how can we follow their rollout, partly by building new plants, but partly their rollout of their ERP system, things like this. And the first procurement project with Act and the Bell was probably 2002, 2003, so the same as everyone else. And it was, they built their 6 connections to BASF, Celanese and Dow and Shell. But then they started coming back towards the sort of 2009, 2010. Again, actually, I think off the back part of your presentation on that, saying, hang on, we need to be thinking more aggressively than that. So we were doing projects around multiple processes. So we do vendor managed inventory, we do O2I, because they make paint in North America, in their shops, they also do brushes and pails and plastics, and so they have with certain people a sort of buy to sell basis. And also one of the things which we were doing was sort of getting into the production area. So they send us production orders, which then go to the packaging people. So the packaging people get I'm going to make 1,000 cans of red paint and then 1,000 cans of blue paint. And so what they have is their packaging people will then put on the pallet 1,000 cans, 1,000 lids, 1,000 labels ready for Act and the Bell. And the important thing in the process is the way that we've done it is you've got easy visibility saying that all of the bits which are needed for that production run is available and ready. So a plant can look at it and say, of the 100 production runs that I've got coming up, I can see that my packaging people have got 97 of them ready. All those 3 I need to worry about because they haven't got the special labels. And they can reorder production as needed ahead of time rather than that, oh my god, I just haven't got it here and now. So it's taking production issues out of the process quite dramatically. What then ended up happening is they built those processes and said, I want the same process in Argentina, in Turkey, India, UK, all these third world countries. And particularly the thing which was nice is sort of going back to earlier, the driver for the UK was the head raw material purchasing. So even though it had been this centralised project saying we need to be one Act and the Bell and do it the standardised way, what happened was the central purchasing guy doing, hang on, I've got this here for me, I'm building a plant in the north of England, I want it completely automated. And they did it completely automated, and they actually changed some of the ways they're doing the processing as well. So they designed it into the new plant to be dealt with in a completely automated way, in a completely VMOI type style. And you're still running projects. I think the latest one's India, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's actually just started. At least the bigger implementation program in India and Asia, in fact.
And really to sort of underline it, so to go back to the BASF VIP, this is what they presented last year. So there's sort of a desire over a 3-year period to get 4,000 suppliers, raw material suppliers, or raw material direct, might be direct as well, but raw material suppliers onto an automated O2I process from the BASF perspective. Of those 4,000 suppliers, they probably expect another 5,000 to be forward-based. There will be ones who are big enough, sophisticated enough to do a full end-to-end connectivity, and Alemco will be there to support those projects. So BASF knows they can't get it down and solve it and say, go to my portal. They still understand that there's going to be, for the big partners, the peers in the industry, a full end-to-end connectivity. But for the other people, they're saying, here's the portal. And they're saying, well, yes, we're going to post our orders and we're going to post the ability to see these, but by the way, I'm going to give you information about payments, and I'm going to give you information through the process which will help you as well. So they've very much done it as a collaborative tool that can go out to the suppliers. What we did as Alemco was build the capability to roll out to that and to do mass onboarding. And so it's the text through contract like you get in that. It's the ability for them to send us large amounts of details. We go off to 200, 300, 400 suppliers of the shop, say, BASF wants you to do this. And we have automated systems which will say, I've sent out 400 emails, I've got 300 back, I've got 300 back, 200 of them said they're going to do it. And we have graphs and capabilities sort of following through how you can do those large onboarding. One of the things which I like that we did was when we looked at it to say, hang on, this is a support model that we need to look at in Alemco, but also a support model we need to look at in BASF. So we've sat down with the team at BASF who do all the support for all the flow of information, saying, okay, if you've got this many suppliers on board, how are you going to manage this? If we get to the end of the project and we do 4,000, what happens if number 4,001 turns up and says he wants to do the project? How are we going to manage that? How is it easy to keep it rolling forward? How is it if I've got someone in wave 1 who said no because he was doing an ERP update, then when we're in wave 12, but they say, oh, can I be involved again? How do you pull things like that into it so that BASF always knows what's going on, we always know what's going on, no supplier is left hanging. So we've done quite a lot of work really sort of between the three sides of technology, people support and Alemco support to make sure that it's all being covered and will be managed as we roll through the next 2 or 3 years. And I'll come back in 3 years' time and see if it works. One of the things, and you've heard it for people who've come to the presentations over the last few years, that Alemco is moving its base platform from Quicklink 1.0, which we built in 2001, to the new Quicklink 2.0 platform, which we started running 2 or 3 years ago. The BASF VIP project is all driven from that. And part of the reason it's all driven from that is that the dashboard is on there and the click-through contracts link into it, and the ability to see what's going on in the program is in the same homepage. So it's one of the first projects where the real volume and the real meat is going through it. And it's not, I'm migrating from 1.0 to 2.0, it's the best place for this to go is on this platform. And so again, when people come to me with projects nowadays, I'm generally doing what's the best place for the project. And 80-90% of the time, I'm saying Quicklink 2.0 because of the better capabilities of dashboard and availability of doing things. And actually, it is, we have stuff that is cheaper and quicker. And what the tech folks were telling us actually is the case. It is easier to do connectivity, it is easier to do things. I did a project recently around end-to-end traceability and serial numbers with BASF, where we built brand new universal business documents so they could transfer serial numbers backwards and forwards, and the information around whether serial numbers being used or destroyed or collapsed or things like that. So the ability of the platform is where people were telling me it was going to be 2 years ago, which makes my life really easy. So this is sort of the final slide, and we're just about doing well for time. So Dick, did you want to talk through sort of how you've seen the change over the few years?
Yeah, so this is actually an overview of the 3 programs, Goodyear 2010, AkzoNobel 2012, 2015 onwards, the BASF approach. So 2010, target group of suppliers we want to do certain process, the VMOI. We engage individually with the suppliers. First, Goodyear price guarantee, the commercial agreement. Once that is okay, continues with the onboarding process. So you do the setup, individual training of the suppliers, conference calls, support sessions, etc. Really on an individual one-by-one basis. AkzoNobel was much more an approach like, okay, you want to implement a certain process, like order to cash in the UK. We have 80 suppliers that we want to implement as soon as possible. Okay, let's move to 10 to 15 suppliers at once. We do a group training session for those suppliers. We try to document everything as much as possible. We do the setup in waves, and every month we onboard 10 to 15 suppliers and continue to the next wave. But for BASF, if you are talking about thousands of suppliers, also their approach won't work anymore. You can't do individual or group training sessions anymore. You really need to build self-service solutions. Where a supplier gets an email, they say, okay, this is the intention of the program, do I agree yes or no? If they say yes, then they have to verify the information we have from that supplier. So is the name correct, is the contact person correct? If they say yes, then automatically we do the setup on the Analytica system. BASF is notified that all the steps are done. They do the commitment or the approval in their SAP system, and the next day onwards, the first purchase orders start to flow through Analytica, and they automatically appear in the portal. So no one-by-one or group interaction anymore with the suppliers. So basically, between supplier and Analytica, the only contact is to self-train, either documentation or training videos.
And one of the key things there is, again, when we look at it in the projects, there's the cost of working with Analytica, so employing someone like Dick in professional services, but there is an internal cost in your teams as well. And so in all these tools, not only does it take effort away from Analytica, so the project is cheaper per supplier, it does take effort away from your internal teams. So you can have one guy at AkzoNobel saying over these 80, and rather than him having to be on a call with each of those 80 because of whatever reason, it is actually no, I know that Analytica's got the tools that can contact them, and yes, we have very clear escalation. So if they don't come back up, the second or third contact will go back to the central people saying, how important are these? Do we need a one-to-one call? We've still got the ability to do what we were doing with Goodyear in 2010, but that's now the escalation process. And so that, as we start the project, we sit down saying, how do you want to do these? Which of these thousands you want to do you want to worry about escalation versus which of the, well frankly, if you don't do this in a 3-year period, you won't be a supplier anymore. And that's how you start looking at things. So we wanted to sort of run through that just so you can get a feel of what's been going on in Analytica, what's been going on with different projects. We could have picked on some others. There is various projects always going on all the time, but I want to sort of pick from sort of different areas. Any questions? Anything that you want to ask? Any views or thoughts from what you've seen?
Could self-service work for example, a VMI implementation?
Could also work, yes. Because from a process point of view, there is no difference between implementing a VMI process or an order to cash process. The messages are a little bit different. Solution works a little bit different. But supplier, you need to have certain information from master data set up from the system.
But self-service basically means they go to the site and they get the information there. You don't have to go there, train them, help them.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless they ask specifically.
Yeah, yeah. But of course, you also have to consider what is the size of my program. If I have one supplier, do I want to build a self-service program? Or is it better to do it individually or maybe 10 by 10 in group sessions? Because all the preparation work and building the self-service application to make it work for a Goodyear program, that requires quite some effort. So there is a balancing act. Okay, with 50 suppliers, it's better to do one by one. With 5,000 suppliers, it's better to do self-service. But what with 200 suppliers? Where should they be positioned? That's really the key question, I think.
Great. If there's no other questions, I'll say thank you very much for your time. Lunch is 5 minutes away. Time for protection. I'm not sure where lunch is. Is it upstairs?
I
don't know. So it's somewhere upstairs. So if you have any questions, feel free to find me over lunch. And obviously, I cover all the supply chains. If you have questions on anything else, I can help with that as well. Thank you very much.